Amgen, 7th year of the Tour of California, starting off in the center of Santa Rosa on a big circuit around Sonoma County. And this the opening stage of the race, 186 kilometers or 116 miles for the riders, and right from the gun there was action with a breakaway group pool of 8 riders getting clear.
They built themselves a massive lead. Maxime Bouet of France was the rider from AG2R who felt that this was a very good breakaway to surprise the sprinters on the opening day. They built themselves a massive advantage of over 8 minutes and 15 seconds at one stage after just 140 kilometers of the race.
So the 8 riders, including Americans Jeff Lauder and Canadian David Bowie, Andrew Dalheim, Ben-Jacques Maines, Sebastian Salas, Josh Atkins and Sam Johnson, they were throwing the gauntlet down as the field raced along the borders of the Pacific Ocean. Taking the second sprint of the day, Jeff Lauder won the first small time bonus sprint here on the Fort Ross Road at 112 kilometers covered of the day. Another battling sprint, and again it was Jeff Lauder who was taking it out in the blue there on the right, just ahead of Ben-Jacques Maines.
But as the main field came down to the Pacific Ocean, they started to whip up their interest and tried to reduce the advantage of the leading group of 7 riders, which was a little bit too dangerous at 8¼ minutes. As they started to come to the final climb of the day, all of a sudden it plummeted from 8 minutes advantage down to 4.
This was the last climb of the day. Topping out, there would be just 37 kilometers or 23 miles from the finish. And David Bowie was having the best day of his life because the Canadian would be first to the top. The field themselves were still dangling but closing in quite quickly and running now inside of 3 minutes. The other riders, they were minus Andrew Dalheim. He'd been dropped on this climb, so they were down to 7. The Peloton too were under the impetus of the Garmin Barracuda team.
All of the big teams now started to take a very keen interest in the pacemaking, because not only were Garmin Barracuda very often at the front, we were also helped by Radio Shack Nissan Trek, but over the top of the climb, the Canadian rider Bowie got himself maximum points once again. Even though he was very closely challenged over the summit, he would at the end of the day walk away with the King of the Mountains title.
Yes, David Bowie and Sebastian Salas had been dicing out on the mountains all day long. Bowie was getting the advantage though of pulling on the Nissan King of the Mountains jersey on day 2, and the race would restart from San Francisco. But the pace was continually being whipped up and the gap was coming down. Remnants of the breakaway were in between, and the whole spread was 2 minutes and 10 seconds. It was Team Rabobank who was racing for the finish and trying to catch up with the riders ahead, who were now splitting up.
Yeah, the main field was really starting to bore down on these leaders, but eventually the leading group of 7 riders split down into 3 and 3. Sam Johnson of XOG was one of the first casualties of the acceleration and the undulations on the outskirts of Santa Rosa.
Soon there were only 3 survivors of the 8-man breakaway. Jeff Lauder, David Bowie and Jacques Maines were the only 3 riders now as the peloton were closing in. A block chain here for Jeff Lauder, and he took a little while to sort it out, but he would get back in touch with the other 2. It was still Rabobank leading the charge, and the gap was coming down.
Coming down very dramatically at 18 kilometers to go. It was around about the 1 minute margin, and all of a sudden the main peloton could see their prey in their sights, and they realized they had a very good chance of winning. One man, Peter Sagan, was hoping to open the day up with a big account, and he was sitting nicely placed halfway down the pack. And at 10 kilometers to go, if these 3 riders looked over their shoulders, they could very smartly see the main field, who were hovering at just 15 seconds.
Yes, less than 2 kilometers later, they were almost back in the clutches of the main field, which had swelled again to quite a considerable size. It was time to say thanks for the ride, as we've been in the lead, this group of 3, for the whole race. Then, as they were caught, Peter Sagan was stopping by the roadside. The champion Slovakia had a flat back tyre, and he was inside 8 kilometers from the finish.
With a very slow wheel change, he took lots of risks to try and get himself back into the main field at just 6 kilometers to go. Using car for car, he pulled himself back up to the back end of the main field with a good assistance coming from a couple of his teammates.
Yes, Vanotti and King dropping back from the field, and then just as he was rejoining, there was a massive pile-up in the centre of the road, taking out the Rabobank's prime sprinter, Michael Matthews. So when they came to the Kenda 1 kilometer sign, it was a bunch sprint amongst the riders, and somehow, with the adrenaline flowing from his his troubled day, Peter Sagan, one of the young riders in the race at 22, opened with a stage win, and in history this was his 4th stage win in the Amgen Tour of California. But this time there will be a leader's yellow jersey awaiting him.
Yes, he crossed the line just ahead of the Australian rider Heinrich Hausler and Freddie Rodriguez of Exergy and the United States. Australia also had another rider up there in the top 10 with Lee Howard in 4th place.
George Hincapie, the veteran there, getting home in 6th, but the man who really had an extraordinary day from a flat tyre to a yellow jersey is now the leader.